Hi guys, this is Mark. In this video, I will demonstrate how to configure, install, and run Backendless Pro in the Azure environment. I will focus on the single server installation mode, which is where the entire Backendless stack, all of its components, are running on the single virtual machine. The process is quite straightforward, consists of kind of high-level 4 steps. However, some of those steps require a lot of little details, but I will make sure to point out all of them. You will need to be able to generate an SSL certificate, and I have put together commands for macOS. If you are running on plain Linux or Windows, you would need to Google to understand how to use those commands in those environments. But there's plenty of information on the internet that documents the process. So going back to the 4 steps of installing Backendless Pro in Azure. Number 1, we will create an Azure virtual machine. That will be a very straightforward process, and by the time it is done, Backendless Pro Manager, which is a special tool that we have created, will already be there, and then we will switch to Backendless Pro Manager running on that Azure virtual machine, and it will guide you through the process of installing Backendless Pro. Once Backendless Pro Manager is done, Backendless will be running on your machine, and you will be able to access it through the IP address associated with that machine and use Backendless console and all of the APIs. However, from the practical standpoint, it makes sense to allocate domains that will be mapped to Backendless console and another domain for the APIs. This way you get a very user-friendly way of interacting with Backendless. But that will also require to install an SSL certificate for those domains. I have gone through the entire process. It does work. So now I will just demonstrate how to get to the point of where everything runs. To visualize the entire process, or kind of a high-level architecture, what you will see is you will have an Azure virtual machine with Backendless Pro running in it. Then there will be 2 domains, one for the console and the other for the API. We will create 2 app gateways. So in Azure, the concept of app gateway provides a way to route requests for a specific domain using SSL to a virtual machine, which is exactly what's going to be here. Is the domains are going to be pointing to the app gateways, and then app gateways will point to Backendless Pro. If you are familiar with installing Backendless Pro in other environments such as Amazon or DigitalOcean, the concept of app gateways in those environments is called load balancers. And there is a load balancer in Azure, but that will not work simply because you will not be able to allocate an SSL certificate that will be mapped to a domain and then proxy the SSL requests HTTPS through load balancers in Azure. But app gateways handle that scenario quite nicely. So now let's switch to the Azure environment and let's get going. So what you see on my screen is the Microsoft Azure dashboard that provides access to all of the services in Azure. You would need to create an account, and when you log in, you will see something similar. We will start by creating the virtual machine. So under Azure Services, locate virtual machines. You can search for it if it doesn't show up in the list, but virtual machines is that part of the interface that you need. So once you go into virtual machines, click Create and select Azure Virtual Machine. So in here, it's a process that consists of 8 steps here. So each individual tab is a specific step. So the process is quite straightforward. It indicates which fields are mandatory. You would need to have a subscription. Right now, I got a free trial, which is very nice of Microsoft to provide that option. The resource group is something that really unifies all of the services that you will be creating kind of under one umbrella. So a new group is going to be created for you. You would need to give it a name to the virtual machine, and I will call it Backendless Pro Demo. select the region, which is the geographic region where your Backendless Pro will be running. Make sure to select the region that is closest to where the majority of the users of your application are going to be. Then the image would have to be Ubuntu, and it is selected by default. Make sure it is x64. And then the size of that virtual machine is going to be very important. I recommend selecting the one that has at least 4 virtual CPUs. And this one fits the profile. Then you would need to create your SSH public key, and the key pair, assign it a name to the key pair. So I can say this is my key pair. And this will be needed only if you would ever have to log in to that instance through SSH. The process of installing Backendless Pro does not require you to do this. However, the process of installing a virtual machine requires this. So make sure to go through and fill it up by giving it a username and then the name of the key pair. Then, as far as the ports, you can leave it as this. We will be opening up additional ports once virtual machine is started. So after that, click Next, and in here you would need to, for the production purposes, you would need to make sure that you have at least 20 gigabytes of disk space, and this is where you can create. By default, I believe it comes with 8, but you can attach an additional disk to provide more storage. If you don't do it now, you would still be able to install Backendless, but for larger databases, for just the smooth operation of the product, 20 gigabytes is going to be the minimum that you would need. Then click Next, Networking, and a virtual network is going to be created. So every time you see this new, it means that a new resource will be allocated for you when you go through this. And as you can see, there's going to be a new virtual network, new subnet, new public IP address. Okay. Then take all the defaults, then click on Management. And in here, we don't need to modify anything. Same for monitoring. And once you get to the advanced section, that is going to be quite important. So in here, what you will need is a enable user data right here. And then this user data is going to be a command that you need to paste that will execute a script during the process of starting up that virtual machine. And that script will actually bring in Backendless Pro Manager and install it. And Backendless Pro Manager will then, we will connect to it in order to install Backendless into that virtual machine. So where do you get that user data? And that one is available by going to our GitHub repository. So if you go to github.com/backendless and then locate the Pro Manager project, and then go into the doc directory, and in here you will find azure.md. So when you navigate to azure.md, the very first under installation step 1, this command, copy it, and this is the command that you will need to paste in this field user data. Okay, and that's it. So then click Next for tags. There are no tags. Next to review and create. So Azure does the analysis of all the data, everything looks good, and then click Create, and now the virtual machine will be created. All right, so this an SSH key pair contains both public key. Azure does not store the private key, so we can download it and create the resource. So I will save that key. So now it is saved, and at this point, the virtual machine is being deployed. It will take a little bit of time. Once it is done, you get a pop-up here on the screen informing you that the virtual machine has been deployed. So now we're going to wait till that happens. Okay, now the virtual machine has been created. The deployment is complete, and the next step will be to open up the ports so we can access Pro Manager. For this, if we go to our virtual machine, so what I did is I went to the home interface, and then under resources, it is going to be in the list of the recent ones. You will see that the type is virtual machine with the name that we have assigned. Click on it, and this will be the management interface for everything related to that virtual machine. Click networking, and in here we can add inbound port rules to open up the ports that we need to access from the outside. Click add inbound security rule. For all of these, it's going to be the default settings. For the destination port ranges, let's start with port 5050, and priority can remain the same. Priority is how Azure treats all those security rules. Here in the description, we can say Pro Manager access port. Click add. And then another one will be, so this security rule has been created, and another one will be port 5051, and this is the port that the Pro Manager uses for real-time communication, such as retrieving logs and so on. So in here, this is going to be Pro Manager real-time port. Click add. The priority was already taken, so let's bump it to the next number. Click add, and now we will have both of these security rules in place. So we will see that 5051 will show up here momentarily. There you go. So now we have 5051. So what should be done next is we need to take the IP address of our instance, and when you go to the overview section, you will see that public IP address, and it shows what that IP address is. Copy it to clipboard, and then open up a browser window, paste the IP address, and do 5050. So in this now opens up Backendless Pro Manager that has been installed on our virtual machine in Azure. And this is the product that we provide, we being Backendless, that gives you an ability to install Backendless into your instance. The way this works is here you will select the Backendless Pro version. Always go with the latest one. Local mounting path can stay the same. You would need to obtain Backendless license key, and if you don't have one, click on this link. A form will open up, fill out this form, and you will get a trial license for Backendless Pro that will be valid for 30 days. So make sure to paste it into here. Then you would need to create user ID and password to access Pro Manager, and because it provides functionality that may be quite important where you will need to access it later, and then this way the access to Pro Manager is going to be secure. So now let me get my license key, and I will paste it here, and we'll proceed with the installation. So now I have my license key. I pasted it into the interface, and let's click begin installation. So now Backendless Pro Manager is installing Backendless onto the virtual machine, and you will see various log messages indicating about of the progress that it's making. There may be some log messages that are going to be duplicated, just like you see it here, and that is okay because there are multiple processes running and one could be waiting on another. But in overall, this process will take about a minute to complete. So you will see that it started 14:53:51. And it's going to be in probably another 30 seconds before the installation is complete. So when you see the message that says all services are created, you can see the status of each service on the manage page. That means that Backendless Pro has been installed. And by clicking Manage Backendless, you will access the actual Pro Manager. So the Pro Manager, it will list all the moving parts of the Backendless stack. Right now, we will wait till all of them are green and say running. And right now, they're just starting up. For each individual element here, you can click. There's a corresponding menu item here, so you can click and see the logs coming in from that specific instance. Okay, Then once everything is up and running, we will be able to actually access Backendless. So now everything is green and it says running, which means Backendless has been started on that virtual machine. There are two URLs that are shown right here for Web Console and the API that you can use to access Backendless. However, before we can access it, these ports 32400 and 32300, they need to be added to the inbound rules so the ports are accessible, because right now they are not. So take a moment to write down 32400 for console and 32300 for the API, and go back to the Azure interface. Click, make sure that your instance is selected, click networking, and let's add those inbound rules. So one is going to be 32400, which is console. In fact, we can, for the name, we can say console port, click add. And then another one is going to be 32300, which will be API. 322, you can say API port. Click add. So as soon as you can see those two ports in the list, 32400 is already in there. As soon as you see the API port showing up in the list, then the URLs that are shown by the Pro Manager are going to be accessible and you'll be able to access Backendless. So let's wait a moment till 32300 appears in the list as well. Here it is. Both of them are in here. So now let's go back to the Pro Manager and click this link for the Web Console. So you see the login screen for Backendless Console. You would need to create an account for yourself. I'm going to create one for me. And now we can access Backendless Console. So I will create test app. Let's create a test database table. I will call it person. Create one column, which will be name. And let's add a few records. David and Anna. So now let's check if the APIs are working. Yes. So we can see that Backendless is there, database is there. We can make the API calls. So what's left at this point is to configure domains, because right now, in order to access Backendless Console, you have to know the port of your virtual machine. I mean, both IP address and the port that is assigned to Backendless Console. And same thing goes for the API. So as you can see, the API URL uses the port of the API endpoint and the IP address of the machine. And that is not good, because you would have to memorize that IP address, and it's just not good to, communicate with something that it doesn't have SSL, for instance. So the next step will be allocating domain names, generating certificate, and then going through the process in Azure to create app gateways and link those gateways with the virtual machine. That process is a little bit involved, because there are a lot of little moving parts that application gateways in Azure require. But so far it has been very smooth. As you can see, we already have the entire Backendless stack up and running. So the first thing is generating certificates. And for that, for those who are on Mac OS, the process will consist of 3 steps. So you will need to install a utility that is called certbot. And then the way this works on Mac OS is the command is going to be brew space install space certbot. Then you will need to generate a certificate using this command. Okay. And this will require DNS validation of the domain. So of course, in here for the email address parameter, you would need to put in your email address. And then in here, this is the domain for which the certificate is going to be generated. So here I put star.yourdomain.com. I will use my domain, and I will use a wildcard certificate as well. And then after that, the certificate that is generated by this command will need to be exported to the PFX format, because Azure requires a PFX file in order whenever you get to the point of configuring a certificate. So the ultimate goal is to have the PFX file for your certificate, for your domain, that will be used in the process of configuring application gateways. Again, if you are on Windows, you would need to Google and see how to get to the point where certificate is generated. For Linux, I believe most of these, perhaps all of these commands should actually work just on Linux as just fine. So let's start with this process, generate our PFX file, and then we will switch to Azure to complete the installation with of the application gateway. The first step in generating your certificate is installing the certbot utility. I already have it installed, and here's the terminal window where I will be running the commands. And the first command will be this one, the generating the certificate. So copy that command that's going to be in the description for this video and also in the GitHub repository instructions for Azure. And I have it here in the editor. So this is the command. I modified the email address and the domain name. So the domain name for which I will generate the certificate is going to be backendless.us, and the full name is star.backendless.us. So it's going to be a wildcard domain. You would need to have access to the DNS manager for your domain. Wherever you purchase the domain, there will be a DNS management facility. This domain I have registered through GoDaddy, and then by going to GoDaddy, you can see that this is the page where the DNS records can be managed. So what's going to happen is once I run that command, and let me do it right now, just copy everything here, go to the terminal window, and just paste in here. So then the system will ask you for the system password for the currently logged in user, which should be which should have administrator privileges, and this is running as sudo, which is the top level user. So let me type in the password, and now the process is has started. So the way this works is that you need to prove that you actually own that domain, and then you do that by creating a txt record in DNS, and this is the record name, and this should be the record value. So let's do that. And once it is done and we can verify that the record exists, then pressing enter to continue will actually proceed to the step of generating that certificate. So now we will need to create a txt record with a name that shows up right here and the following value. So for the name, we're going to take the first part because everything will automatically append backendless.us in my case, because this is the domain. So let's add a new record. It's going to be txt record. This is the first part, and then the value, this will be the value. Put in the value, set up the TTL, and click Save. All right, so now this record has been created, and there is also a URL right here that is rather useful that you can use to verify that the record has been created. So open up a different browser window, put it in there, and in here, this is the interface that will give you a confirmation whether the record exists or not. Since it will take a little bit of time to propagate throughout the DNS, you may need to just give it a few minutes or some time before these changes are propagated. And let's just wait and see it until we actually can confirm that the record has been created. So now Google Admin Toolbox reports that the TXT record is in place, which means we can return to the terminal window and press enter to continue. So we can see that the certificate has been generated. This is the confirmation, successfully received certificate. And now the next step will be to generate the EFX, I believe. Let me go to the slide. Yeah, the PFX file. And this is the command to execute for the generation. Again, it's going to be available in the GitHub page for Azure. And let me copy this. And what I will need to do is switch to the directory where the files for the certificate are. And then the path is shown right here. I may not be able to do it because there may be additional security, but let me try that first. All right, so now I am in that directory, and let's run this command. So the file that I will generate, backendless-us-cert, which will be placed in my user directory, and let's run it. So this is the system level password. And now this, when it says enter export password, that will be the password that will be associated with the exported certificate. So make sure to put in the password that you can remember. You will need to use it again when you register the certificate with Azure. And you can enter it again to confirm. So at this point, the certificate is generated. Let me make sure that it does exist. Backendless-us-cert. So yes, the file is in there, which is great. And now that the certificate has been generated, we can actually proceed in the Azure dashboard with creating of the application gateways, which is what I'm going to be doing next. So in here, this is the Azure interface, and what I will do is I will locate under Azure Services Application Gateways, or you can just start searching it here. Just type in application gateways. This is the service, and let's create our first application gateway. So here, a couple of things. Make sure to select the same resource group that was created when you were creating the virtual instance. And there will be two application gateways, one for console and then one for the API. So everywhere you go, you will need to put the name for whatever resources that we'll be creating. Make sure to put meaningful names, because later on it will make a lot of difference when it comes to actually managing the various resources created in Azure. So this will be a console application gateway. Same region as before. The virtual network is going to be the same one where the instance is running. So here, whenever you get to subnet, it will say subnet must only have application gateway, which means that we need to create a new subnet for this gateway. So click manage and create a new subnet. And so let's just say console or app gateway subnet. We will be able to reuse the subnet for the second gateway that we will be creating. Just keep all the other defaults, click save. So the subnet has been created. Let's go back here and select this app gateway subnet, click front ends. So in here, we will need to select an IP address for the gateway, and we will create new one because we don't really have. So this is going to be console app gateway IP. Click OK. So that will be created. Click Next. Now we will need to add backend pool. The backend pool is sort of like all the resources that the application gateway can direct traffic to. So click Add Backend Tool. And to continue the naming convention, we will say console app gateway backend pool. And in the backend pool, will be our virtual machine. So in here, once you select the virtual machine, make sure to select this is our virtual machine, the Pro demo, and then click Add, then click Configuration. So in here we have the front end, which is the IP address, we have the back end, and there needs to be a routing rule. So let's create this routing rule, and that's going to be console app gateway routing rule. The priority, how about 200? The listener, again, there needs to be a name, console app gateway listener. So as you can see, actually it's going to be routing rule listener. As you can see, there are a lot of names that you need to assign, and maintaining this naming convention will make it so much easier. So this listener is what sits on the application gateway and waits for the incoming requests. And those incoming requests will be over HTTPS. So select HTTPS. And this is where we will use the certificate that we just generated. In my case, I will just give it a name, Backendless US certificate, because my domain is backendless.us. And let's select the file. And the file is going to be in my home directory. Here's this certificate that was generated today. And the password is going to be the password that I assigned during the generation of that PFX file. Click Add. Oh, so this was configuration of the listener. Now there is a backend target. The backend target comes from the backend pool, and here it also needs to have backend settings. So let's create, since we have never created backend settings, let's add new. And then the backend settings is going to be console app gateway backend settings. It's going to be port over HTTP. However, for console, the port number that we have is 32400. So basically here we say app gateway. This is the backend configuration. You will be routing the traffic to port 32400, which is the console port of Backendless console. And that's where it's being specified. So click Add. And now we have both listener and backend targets configured. Click Add. And at this point, everything's good. Click Next here and Next to Review. So now it will verify that everything is good. Hopefully, yes, the validation passed. And click Create to start creation of this application gateway. Sometimes at times when I tried, it was very quick. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. So I'm not sure how long it's going to take now. While this is going on, I'm going to create the second application gateway for the API domain. So the domain that we will assign to this is going to be console.backendless.us. And there's going to be a second domain, which is api.backendless.us. So while this is going on, let me create a second application gateway. So I will basically repeat the process, the same process that I have gone through here. So now resource group, same resource group, application gateway, API, app gateway, virtual network, same one. And then the subnet, as you can see, we have this app gateway subnet. So we will be reusing the same subnet for both application gateways, which is absolutely okay. So now let's move to the front ends. And we will need to create a new IP address, and that's going to be API app gateway. Why is the IP address important? Well, because we will need to map the actual domain in DNS. We haven't created the domains yet. So far, we created the certificate, and certificate is for the wildcard domain, but specific domains such as console.backendless.us, api.backendless.us haven't been created. We cannot create them yet because we don't really know what the IP addresses are going to be for our application gateways. Once application gateways start up, we will be able to create those domains. So right now we're just basically declaring that there needs to be an IP address for, in this case, API app gateway IP. Click OK. Backends. I'm going to add backend pool. So this is going to be API app gateway backend pool. And it will point to the virtual machine. Again, same virtual machine. We have only one where Backendless Pro is running. Click Add, Configuration. So now we have both front end and the backend pool. And now we're going to configure the routing rule. So the routing rule is going to be API app gateway routing rule. Priority 201, for instance. Listener name API app gateway listener. It will listen on port 443, which is HTTPS. The certificate, let's select the certificate. It's going to be the same certificate because it is wildcard. And the certificate name will be API app gateway cert. And enter the password that was assigned during the certificate generation. And then, so this was the listener. Now backend targets. Backend targets are, so we have API app gateway pool. And then for settings, let's create new settings. And that's going to be API app gateway backend setting port. Oh, it's going to be HTTP, and then for the API, the port is 32300. Everything else, we keep the defaults, click Add, and at this point, this is ready. So now let's move on to complete the creation of this application gateway. Validation passed, which is great. Click Create, and at this point, the second application gateway is being deployed. So now if we go to Home, and from here, there is a link to see all resources. Here it is, all resources. So in here, we can see that we have console application gateway. This one is done. And now the second application gateway is being procured. So let's step into console application gateway. This is the overview with all the configuration settings for the console application gateway. What we need is the public IP address right here, this guy. So we can copy to clipboard, and then let's go back to our DNS registration to actually create a domain for this IP address. So back in GoDaddy, add new record, and that's going to be a record, and we are registering console. We do not need to add backendless.us because this one is assumed by default. And the IP address is going to be this. So at this point, click Save. And this console.backendless.us right here is being created. It will take a little bit of time for it to complete and propagate throughout the internet. So now if we go back to all resources, we should see the second application gateway somewhere here. Let's refresh. And oh no, it's still actually working. So here it is, deployment in progress. And as soon as we get a confirmation that application gateway for API has been created, we'll be able to get the IP address and also configure our second DNS record. So now, as you can see, second application gateway showed up, and while the process has not really completed yet, it's now taking 9 minutes for the first process to complete and about 5 minutes for the second. But nevertheless, at this point, we can get the IP address of the second API app gateway, and let's repeat the same steps that we made to create an A record in the DNS for api.backendless.us. So copy IP address to the clipboard and then go to the DNS manager to create a new record. So this will be an A record. The name is going to be API, and then the value, just paste in your IP address, clean it up, and set the TTL. Click Save, and now both DNS records are in place. api.backendless.us and console.backendless.us. And then back in Azure, if we go to all resources, the gateways are there. However, the process is not really complete. So one of them has finished, and we're waiting for the second application gateway to complete. By the way, while it is running, we can verify that the DNS changes have been propagated by going to the same Google admin toolbox. And in here, what we need to do is to put in, for instance, console.backendless.us, click on a record. And as you can see, this is in place. And what about api.backendless.us? And then, as you can see, the DNS changes have propagated. So what we can do at this point is open a browser and go to console.backendless.us. And now that responds. So we have console running over HTTPS, and this domain name is pointing to our installation of Backendless Pro. So I'm going to log in to my account in Backendless and start using the console. However, there is one thing that we will need to fix, which is if I were to go to data, select the data table and switch to REST console, notice that the full REST API endpoint still uses IP address and port for the API endpoint. And that is something that we can fix by logging into the Pro Manager and making some changes there. So that change will look like this. So first of all, let's get our IP address of our instance. So this is our virtual machine, and this is the IP address. So if we go to the IP address :5050, this is our Pro Manager. And then under configuration, if we go to domains and then general, in here we can specify the actual domain names that both console and API endpoints should be available at. And then for console, and then this is used in a variety of different places, such as code generation, REST console, a variety of different places in Backendless console. It needs to be aware of what its own URL is and what the API endpoint URL is. So in here, it's going to be very simple now. For console, it is going to be console.backendless.us. And in here, this will be API backendless.us, port 443, protocol HTTPS. Click Save and Restart. And if we go to the full status, you will see that some processes are going to be restarting here. And as soon as it starts up, then this installation will be complete. Everything has been restarted now, and let's see if Backendless console works with the new domains, specifically whether the API domain is now configured within Backendless console. For this, I'm going to open another browser tab and navigate to console.backendless.us. I'm going to move the browser window here so you can see the domain. And if I go to the database, select the table, switch to REST console and show full URL, as you can see, it uses now application, the domain that I assigned to the API endpoint. And as you can see, the requests are going through. So this is great. So at this point, Backendless is fully configured. It now responds to the domains that we have configured, one for console, the other for API. And one final point that I would like to bring up is actually closing down the ports that we have originally opened up. Specifically, these ports are going to be on the virtual machine. So if I go to all resources and select the virtual machine, under networking, it will show a list of all the ports that we have configured. So for instance, at this point with the current configuration, if I were to hit this virtual machine directly with port 32400, then the console will open up. In fact, let me do this right now. So here's the IP address 32400, and as you can see, console opens up, which is not a desirable outcome. So in order to prevent this, what you can do is go to networking for your virtual machine, select the port that you want to restrict access to. The port still needs to be accessible by application gateway because application gateway routes the traffic to that port. So click this entry, and in the source, what you can do is you can select service tag, and for the source service tag, select virtual network. So because everything, application gateway, instance are on the same virtual network. So now if I save this, and as soon as the security rule has been applied, and it has, then doing exactly the same thing as I just did, specifically, I open another browser window, put in the IP address of the virtual machine, 32.400, as you can see, this does not respond, which is great. That's exactly what we want. We want to have only one secure way to get into Backendless console, and for that matter, API. So this port is now closed to only the virtual network. And with this, and by the way, you would need to repeat the same thing for other ports. As far as Pro Manager, you could create a separate domain name to open up Pro Manager, and then very similarly as we did with configuring the backend pool, the front end IP address, and assigning the certificate, the entire process would need to repeat it for other resources that you want to access for this installation, so, such as Pro Manager will already have console and API. And with this completes the demonstration and instructions for how to install, configure, and run Backendless Pro in the Azure environment. If you have any questions, please reach out to us on the support forum, support.backendless.com, and we'll be happy to assist you. Thank you for watching this video, and as always, happy coding with Backendless.